Hi, welcome to Project Geospatial. I'm Adam Simmons, and here with me on this special episode is Dr. Shawana Johnson. Dr. Shawana Johnson is a subject matter expert in the commercial GeoINT technology, areas such as global scale, satellite imagery, cloud analysis and delivery, and the Internet of Things, or IoT as a lot of people know it as now. She's focused on geospatial technologies throughout the industry, if not the world now, right? You've been all over the place. But I feel like that's only scratching the surface about your expertise in the industry. And I'd like you to go into some detail about your journey here, pun intended.
All right. Well, it has been quite a journey. And I was able to get started at a very unique time. And before my time in the industry, President Reagan signed into law the Land Remote Sensing Policy Act. And that encompassed awarding two companies the contract to commercialize remote sensing worldwide. And the two companies that were awarded the contract were GE Aerospace, which now people would know that organization. It became Martin Marietta, and then Lockheed Martin, that division out of Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. And the other company was Hughes Aircraft. One built the sensor, one built the bus. And the sensor was originally ERTS-1, and it had been a classified sensor that was used for multispectral food security analysis that was developed as a result of the Great Grain Robbery that Russia perpetrated. And as years went by, and the technology became more sophisticated and multispectral technology was deemed of value globally, President Reagan wanted to share that capability with the rest of the world. GE Aerospace and Hughes Aircraft won the contract to commercialize remote sensing. They got started for a few years and they worked with a lot of scientists, but they weren't building business opportunities, and they weren't enhancing and enlarging the industry. So they decided to bring in people with more business backgrounds as well as technical. And I had been at GE Information Services, GEISCO, a division of General Electric, and a friend of mine called me up and asked me if I would like to interview with a satellite company. And I was on the phone and I was involved in what today we would call high performance computing in distributed environment. And I kind of clicked the phone on I said, satellites, I'm quite sure, I don't know if that has two T's or two L's. And I said, I think you have the wrong person. He said, no, you're the right person. You understand technology. This is a technology. Please come down and interview. And I was in New York at the time. And so I came to DC, to Silver Spring, Maryland, actually. And I was taken into a room that was filled with monitors, computer monitors. And I saw images up on the monitors and I was amazed. I saw Mount Fuji, and the top of Mount Fuji was gone. So there had been a volcanic explosion. I thought the RLC. I said, "Is that the RLC?" And then I saw some other things like deforestation patterns in the Amazon, and I was completely taken aback by the imagery. And all the while, I'm asking questions of a person that I didn't know. And I said, he said, well, you know your geography. I said, well, this is beautiful. And while I'm wandering, looking at these images that are in the room, and there was a red light flashing on the ceiling. I had no idea what that meant either, but I was down in a cleared facility. They had me come in so I could see the imagery. And as he went through and I'm looking, he said, what would you do to sell this? And I asked a lot of questions. How did it get here? Where did it come from? What's the data really look like? And I said I would set up distributors all over the world. How does it get to the ground? He talked about ground. So I said I would go to those. And within a few minutes, he left the room. And the person I knew, Dr. Stephen Cox, came back in and he said, well, when can you start? And I said, well, when am I going to have the interview? He said, oh, you just had it. And unbeknownst to me, that was the Honorable Jeffrey Harris, who was one of the members of the board and was very involved, as was Jim Clapper, then who became General James Clapper, our OD&I eventually. So they were all involved on the early stages, and I became one of the heads of sales. And my job was to tell the world about remotely sensed data and to help educate the world. So we created some training curriculum, and involved in that were some industry leaders at the time, Lori Jordan, who created the company Erdos Imagine. And Erdos Imagine is now Intergraph, which then, these companies have all been bought and sold several times, but it is now that Geospatial Services division. And Jack Dangerman, the president and founder of ESRI, we combined parts of their software with Landsat data, training curriculum, and we distributed that at the time to 3,600 universities worldwide. And we worked with all the ground stations, and we started finding all the space pockets of capability that existed everywhere where Landsat was downlinked, and where all those areas were, there were groups of scientists and technical people and business people who wanted to help distribute Landsat data. And the goal was to change the business model and encourage and inspire people to get this distributed and utilized in their areas, in their countries, at their local provinces, and to utilize it for environmental purposes and a variety of other things. We just wanted them to explore the use of multispectral data. There was the very strongly used thermal band at the time. Over the years, we've had trouble with the thermal band on and off. Now we have Landsat 9, and it's again going strong. But it was to explore all those uses. And so that's how I got involved. And I got to help stand up some of the very first distributors globally, and they are still some of the largest distributors of satellite imagery and value-added providers to this day, working for Maxar and multiple other companies and countries in the proliferation of not only our NASA, NOAA, USGS data, but also the European Space Agency, the Italian Space Agency, the Japanese Space Agency. So it was a global opportunity. It was very unique responsibility at the time, and an opportunity to work with people then who became public policy and law setters about the capability of remote sensing that are still pretty active to this day.
So you saw the very dawn of commercial satellite imagery, and that's not an intention to age you or anything, but the at that time no one knew anything about it from a public standpoint, and you got to shape that image in people's minds of what that is.
Yes, we were right there at the beginning. They'd been at it about 6 to 7 years, but when they really took a lot of time and put emphasis on more of the, I guess I would say, the business side of the equation, we always knew Landsat would go back to the government. It would be free. But in order to get people to understand the value, the thought process was we have to give it value, see what the rest of the world says and how they want it, if they want it, get them to start using it. And I got to be part of that very first entry into the world on the global remote sensing stage, so to speak.
Looking back, what do you think about that? How do you feel about your place in the start of the industry?
Oh, it was an honor.
So how has the industry changed over the years, in your opinion? And I know that's a big question.
I would say two things. Part of it has not changed at all, at all. I hear a lot of the same types of questions and concerns and challenges about using the data, about accessing the data. And then some things have changed drastically on the technology side. So we now have high-speed compute. The cost of compute has plummeted. The ability to move the data skyrocketed in a way that we can move data in milliseconds versus what it used to take to get data transmitted and transferred somewhere. That part has made the data so much more accessible. So for me, the accessibility of it and the usability of it has vastly improved. The science behind it is still very difficult because it is still not one click or two click easy. We can deliver user interfaces and API that allow you to access things that are finished products, but to get to that finished product where you just get your solution still requires a great amount of rectification and correction because it's an object in space, looking at objects on the ground, making that measurement through space, which has a lot of particles in it. And there are many things that have to be seen to, attended to, georectified, orthorectified. And that's still a very difficult piece for people that want something that in their minds, when they see it on TV or in a television show or a movie, they want it to just be that quick and easy, not realizing what has to be done.
Is that in today's age, is that an issue of technology, or is that an issue where the industry still struggles to understand workflow? What would you say on that?
Oh, I don't think the industry has a problem with workflow at all. It's just they want to get to the masses, and the masses still have to understand the science behind the technology.
So it's bringing the masses up to an educational level to help understand the usefulness of this technology.
Yes. And I've heard many people make this comparison that they'll say, you know, my husband or my wife, they have their cell phone. They don't want to know how it works. They don't want to know anything about cell phone signals, cell towers. They just want it to work. And I think we have when you go to the masses, that's something you must take into account. You're not going to turn folks that want the value of the data. They want to see the value, they want to use the value, and they want it to be more responsive and immediate. And it's not degrading their lack of science knowledge at all. It's saying we have to step up the automation and the advanced analytics at speed and at a scale that it delivers individually what not only our major clients of remote sensing want, but to get to the masses, you truly have to deliver a tool for the masses. And we saw that with Bing Maps, Google Maps, how responsive people were to that technology at their fingertips. But to solve science-based problems, earth-based problems, climate, environment, mining, oil and gas, DoD and intelligence looks at multimodal data sets in theater operations. There's a lot of nuances in all of those delivery methods that have to be simplified and yet be very thorough, mitigate risk, and understand the bias in the data as well and the accuracies.
So to pull that string on struggles the industry is still attempting to overcome by reaching the masses, There are some out there who express innovations that still need to be made in terms of licensing policies, even pricing for that matter, because a lot of people still say that satellite imagery is still very expensive. Look at EO imagery compared to SAR imagery, new tasking compared to archive imagery. The technology has drastically improved, but how much has the pricing really changed, and how much do you see it needs to improve, or even the licensing needs to improve to reach the masses?
So there's part of the industry that hasn't changed. You know, you asked me how much is it. We are still talking about prices, and we're still talking about licensing. And that has never changed. There have been great strides made in licensing. In many respects, as you look at major technology offerings. So in our country, you know, we now can have a commercial synthetic aperture radar-based program. We didn't have one of those for years. I testified for Noah Nesdis in many places, talking about the fact that having a commercial radar program would not damage the airborne industry, and it would not violate other national technical means capabilities. And that was finally solved. I've done a lot of research work and testified as well about resolution. And we've seen that improve significantly from 30 meters to now 0.33 meters. And so those things have made progress. Yes, some would say they're slow. There is good reason that I believe it was scrutinized so closely and by people that had certainly other knowledge than I had. So I understood it and tried to help where I could. On the other side, in terms of pricing, you've got a lot of new entries. Small set, the technology miniaturization, the new speed of technology, the amount of money that's flowing in to space in general, and allowing new instrumentation. Everything is new. The mechanical engineering, the fluid dynamics, everything has improved. It allows more people to go to space, but the money that's been invested, if it's not by the government, there's a lot of venture capital or private wealth money, and they do eventually want to see a return on their investment. So we have a lot of organizations stood up in this part of the industry, in this Earth observation, even RF, SAR. There are individuals who have made investments, and they also have an exit strategy for how long they'll be in the business, and then they want to move. So there is product pricing involved. Now, weigh that new technology and the business interests against, we have some of the most beautiful, elegant instruments doing Earth observations in the world, created by NASA, NOAA, distributed by the US Geological Survey and the European Space Agency with the Sentinel program. And those instruments and those sensors, although many would say it's coarse resolution, and no data are free because you have to...
Taxpayer.
Somebody paid for that to be available. And when you access the data, you must ingest it. You have to process it. You have to understand how to process it. You must correct it and then turn it into the kind of output that you want. So even that takes time, but they don't pay for the base data. And when I meet with so many of the new small sat companies and the new space companies, we try to run an analysis of how close does your technology come to what's already there, what's being used, and what's free. because I find in even the major multinational conglomerates who manage very large supply chains, will show them better resolution and the cost of a higher resolution multispectral product compared to what they might get right now in an automated flow from Landsat and Sentinel. And they choose the automated flow that they already have in place where the data was free. But it isn't the same resolution. So there's, I always tell people, you're not competing against your neighbor that you think is launching a similar satellite. You're competing against the part of the industry that has sprung up over decades and provided this tool to make sure it grew in use, but now the base data is not provided at a fee. That's where the challenges in pricing come. And the challenges also come from most of their clients, regardless of location in the world, are still the government side. And the government does pay for that data. And the individual countries want the commercial side of their world to stand up and recognize the value of the data and utilize it in the same way. And yet they don't have the same technology tools, the same workflows on that side of the commercial house. And so there's that pricing struggle where the commercial world says it's too expensive, and if it were less costly, I might institute it and merge it into my workflow. So there's a business side, there's the science side, and there's a historical side where the base data has proven to be, in many cases, good enough. And I don't think we're going to get out of that realm soon. We have inklings of it with new, good example is a synthetic aperture radar capabilities, some of the more traditional sensors versus new, agile, smaller synthetic aperture radar instruments that have the ability to point and shoot and point and shoot and point and shoot and then move versus move, point, shoot, move. It's a very different, we're exercising all kinds of new methodologies for access in space, and those will start to change price points. And then we'll see, is that data in compared to a more elegant or a bigger sensor, how will that hold up? Because one price point might be $1 a scene versus, $1,000. I think we don't know yet. I think that story is still playing out.
That makes sense. So to turn it on a more inspiring note on the industry, now over the years, satellite imagery has done so much, not just for the government, but for the public as well. What would you say has been the most impactful or things that satellite imagery has made the most difference of in our society, or even from a historical standpoint? How has it changed people's minds of, wow, this can actually make an impact on a nation, or a country, or our daily lives? What have you seen over the years of the best uses of it from a use case standpoint?
One of my favorite stories, one of the groups of people who helped all of the business development teams that we had stood up early on, it was the Santa Barbara Research Institute. There was a group of scientists there that advised and helped tune the sensors so that the imagery that was produced was some of the best in the world. And so I decided to start having business development meetings there. And also some of our own applied scientists would come. And I'll never forget sitting there with the scientist, some of which we didn't know who they were or what exactly they did, and I knew they worked in other places. And we showed an example of a Landsat. We were working on some projects in South America. And we, one of our applied scientists, a team of them, were looking at that there was a heavy rain, heavily rained upon area in Chile. And they thought they saw a rift in the mountainside. And they weren't quite sure what they thought they were seeing. And they just kept changing the bands that they were looking at to where they believed they saw a landslide potential occurrence, and took it to the leaders of the company at the time, who then took it up the chain, because we had a board of directors that consisted of a very unique group of people from all over the intelligence community and the space industry. And long story short, we were able to send out an alert and alert this village in time before part of the mountainside came down. And we had before and after images, and then some folks got us some pictures from the ground. We showed that to this group of scientists at Santa Barbara to tell them, what you created saved this village. And there were scientists there, tears, just streaming down their face. And I was like, they said, we didn't know. We're so focused on the mechanics of the mirror, the mechanics of the grinding glass, and so many, the cold focal plane array. They were so taken aback. I realized we have to tell these stories everywhere.
Oh, absolutely.
And so today, you see that. You see where the imagery, regardless of whether it's synthetic aperture radar, multispectral, panchromatic, you see that all the time. Where there are advanced alerts. We know where there are large gatherings of people getting prepared for difficult times in their country. And, we can show that to the rest of the world and say, this is what's going on here. I don't think that has changed, but now the movement of what you can see from space is instantaneous. You see high resolution imagery. It's on the news, it's utilized, and the rest of the world sees it. Now, yes, the rest of the world doesn't realize, how much processing and science is behind that, but it doesn't matter because it demonstrates impact of deforestation in the Brazilian rainforest, which we still have, ice movement and thawing in the Arctic Circle. And the changing of patterns and flow, changing, egress and ingress into those areas. Volcanic ash literally moving from one part of the world to the other. Plastic debris floating in major islands. They look like an island until you zero in on them and you see it's plastics. What we saw after tsunamis and the devastation and how things are moving, and we can warn other countries, this is coming near your coast. Deepwater Horizon, watching the moving oil sheens, preparing coastlines, getting individuals set up to, I worked with a company that alerted Dawn, the producers of the Dawn liquid dishwashing product, and they flooded areas of the Louisiana coastline with their products so that workers could wash the birds and any animals that they saw struggling because they had been coated with oil sheen. So every day, if you watch closely, every day somewhere, the benefit of what was started in commercializing remote sensing is seen around the world.
Oh, and to tell a little story myself on that, I think that was a drastic change when I was working on the U2 imagery when I was in the Air Force.
Gosh, yeah.
And one massive change in mission. We were used to working with Afghanistan and Iraq, both the U2, Global Hawk,
sure.
and the Predator at the time. And when they changed it, when we had a small break because we had wildfires just kind of over the hill from us, and they gave us permission to shoot the U2 over the wildfires, and they were trying to find a way to funnel the imagery back to them because it was classified imagery. It was in classified pipelines. How do you get it back to the wildfires? But regardless of the logistics of it, it was a massive change in mission because we were no longer hunting people and terrorists. It was
right.
helping people around the corner from us, basically helping our neighbors, helping our backyard. And that was to see people on the crew change their entire mentality of, oh, wow, the impact that this is having to themselves, the commitment all of a sudden. You know, it gets a little weary to do, you know, war every day, but to switch your mindset, all of a sudden helping people, the drive that it created, the inspiration, that was amazing, not only to witness, but to feel myself. And I'm like, ooh, I really love this work all of a sudden. Where it's not that I didn't before,
right,
but I have a new meaning behind it that I want to keep on doing it.
Yeah, and that's such a perfect story because this industry is we're tied together because almost 100% of the industry, its original inspiration comes from the military and the intelligence community. And to see the experience you had, that's everywhere. So we still have this wonderful, inspiring crossover from folks who leave the military and say, I want to still work on this, but I'm going to use commercial imagery. I'm going to work on more commercial capabilities. But because of the background that you had and others had in that area, working on more national technical means capabilities, things that are classified, you have a workflow and a thought process which immediately improves the capacity and the capability on the commercial side. It is a wonderful, to me, it is probably the most valuable part of the industry. And I've lived my career on both sides, which people ask me about all the time. How do you do that? But in my mind, I can't separate them because one powers the other, and the commercial side constantly inspires the military side.
Absolutely.
So it to me, it's just the perfect combination of capability, science, intellect. I love everything about it.
Now, the fast forward to the now. You just came back from the satellite conference downtown in Washington, D.C. Can you talk about a little about what you saw there and perhaps some of the things that either surprised you or helped you gauge where the industry is heading?
So Satellite 2022, I'll tell you one of the things that I was very interested in is many of the sessions, the questions from the attendees, regardless of whether you were in a SATCOM, a launch, or a producer, more of a satellite producer session. Didn't matter whether it was 5G, IoT, communications, or less Earth observation at this one. The questions focused on supply chain. I went to 4 sessions, and in all 4 sessions, that was the first question that came up. What does your supply chain look like? Where are you seeing the holdups? How is that impacting your progress? And I was a little surprised that so many people had that focus. And it wasn't just in microprocessors and Intel chips and semiconductors, where we see a lot of that in the news anyway, but it was really all aspects of supply chain. So I think people are very in tune with what's happening, and they're trying to plan out their business and their business strategies. And they were trying to get a good understanding of that from the leaders and the experts that were on the panels or speaking. So that was interesting to me. There were many more smaller, more automated capabilities and smaller parts and more providers, more vendors. So just modems, smaller modems, faster modems. I think of Xilinx and others, more field programmable gate array providers for very different instruments than we would have ever thought about using them before. And so there were more instrumentation vendors. They had a lot of advanced capabilities built into their new offerings. So there's more, if I lumped it into one, I'd say there's a lot more onboard capability than I've seen before. They really focused on advanced onboard machine learning, communications, and downstream analytics. How much of this can I get accomplished on board before I transmit? And that made a great leap forward, I think, during COVID, when people weren't as easily communicative. And, certainly we weren't at conferences this size for quite a while.
Understood. So how do you think what you've seen here at Satellite 2022 will impact what we're about to see at the GeoINT Symposium next month? Do you think it's going to be a lot of the same things? Do you think there are going to be new surprises? What do you think on that?
I'm always up for new surprises. I'm often accused of, you're not on the leading edge. You are definitely on the bleeding edge in your way of thinking. What I see in 5G and IoT and the merging of the local infrastructure data, satellite communication network data, with what must be GeoINT precise data is coming together.
Well, let's back up a second. Sorry, you mentioned 5G. What does 5G have anything to do with geospatial?
So I've studied and been a fan of looking at 5G as a technology since we started talking about it, because it's part of the electromagnetic spectrum. Mm-hmm. It takes up low band, medium band, and high band width. And if it's in the electromagnetic spectrum, I wanted to study it because I wanted to know, how is that going to change the remote sensing offerings? How is that going to impact the electromagnetic spectrum? How's that going to impact spectrum use policy? And we've seen a lot of interaction with the expansion of 5G with avionics, and the fact that part of 5G uses bands that have a lot of the same use area as altimeters. So I think we can't separate. I think it's a mistake to ignore 5G and not look at it in terms of, as a community in the geospatial community, how do we understand it? How do we understand the advancement of China in the 5G world, and the fact that they have the largest distribution capacity for equipment and 5G services and the largest OEM capability. If you looked at the part of the globe that China has equipment and services provisions, it's 66 to 70% of the Earth's land mass. That's significant. And we would be reticent not to be very aware of that. So 5G takes up spectrum. 5G is what we use, and we use SATCOMs and network tools to communicate. It's very important for places that are for just everyday life, and it's very important in areas of the world that are under extreme duress, just like the Ukraine is right now.
Excellent. and going back a little bit to the GeoINT Symposium coming up, I know this year it's happening in Denver, Colorado, which is, I believe it's quite new for the symposium as a whole. I don't think it's ever been in Denver. In terms of where it historically has been, what would you say the focus in terms of what's around Denver, how that will impact the symposium?
So most people don't realize outside of Washington, D.C., the largest geospatial and government community is in the state of Colorado. So to me, it's a very normal place that they would have a GeoINT Symposium for sure.
So it's about time.
Yes, because, when I first entered the industry, I got sent off to some places for my own education, and I was in Colorado a lot. So because there were government facilities that I needed to learn things about and I needed to understand. If I didn't thoroughly understand the technology, how was I then going to give a commercial crossover to the rest of the world accurately and safely? So I think Denver is the perfect spot. It's a bed of geospatial and geological and geography awareness from not only an academic perspective, but a business perspective. When the Earth Observation Satellite Company became part of Space Imaging, which was actually owned by Lockheed Martin, their commercial remote sensing systems division. They took this thing called CRSS, and they turned it into Space Imaging. And then they merged. GE Aerospace was bought by Martin Marietta and Lockheed, and we became Space Imaging EOSat, and the offices were stood up in Thornton, Colorado. And then time goes on, things have merged and changed. You had GeoI, Space Imaging, now Digital Globe, now Maxar. And many of their offices are headquartered there. It's a great location for workforce development because there are so many businesses and so many academic institutions that focus on those particular areas, the disciplines that we need to support the industry. So to me, it's a perfect location.
Excellent. What do you think we'll be seeing next month at the show?
Well, I do know one of the speakers intimately on the tradecraft competition, and you'll be learning about how GeoINT and the preciseness and the geolocational accuracy of what we have fine-tuned on the commercial side, when you merge it with what is happening in DoD networks in terms of 5G and local area data collection, how we can utilize both those capabilities together, purely open source intelligence data, and move it through securely when our Department of Defense is forward deployed, and we can move that data securely over untrusted networks and get solutions and insights to the forward deployed fronts and the endpoints. But we can do that in a safe and secure manner where it provides a commander in theater with some knowledge about an area that he didn't know and helps him make a decision. So if we had been in the Ukraine, for example, we would have used this capability to say, listen, on the southeastern border of the Ukraine, here's what's happening in the communications network activity. Here's some things that are also going on at a venue and at some cell towers. And you might want to look at this because we don't think we think this area of the Ukraine, they're going to come across that border and they are Russian sympathizers and they're going to get across that border very easily. And here's why. And that insight would have been delivered to that commander right then and there on purely open source intelligence data.
That's amazing. That sounds curious and exciting to hear about. So well, you heard it, hopefully you get to check that out when you, if any of you attend next month. That'll be incredible. One of the last questions I have for you, well, I have two questions for you. One touching one more time on the GeoINT Symposium. St. Louis has become a huge city within the industry in recent years. Now, I mean, it's always been a huge city in the industry.
Sure.
But it sort of has its own coming out party, per se, since NGA is now building its Western headquarters out there, and GeoINT Symposium is out there now as well, especially for the next coming years. How do you think, it's one thing for companies to get involved with the industry, government to get involved with the industry, but when you have an entire region get involved with the industry proactively, do you think we'll see things like that with cities like Denver or other cities around these other geospatial hubs? Or is St. Louis truly unique on how it...
So I have a lot of history, right? So St. Louis was in this game long before anyone really ever knew what the term geospatial was even coined. So the floods that occur in that area, St. Louis, the mayor, the governor, long ago were using Landsat data to understand floodplain management, what was happening, what did the areas look like afterwards, so that they could get a big picture of urban management. And they were doing this long ago. But I remember one of my first trips was going to be to the Defense Mapping Agency. Well, I went to St. Louis. I flew into St. Louis because the analysts that I were meeting with were all there. And I'm like, interesting, St. Louis. So they have a very long history of GeoINT and geospatial production. And I think just like when you were deployed and you said, oh my goodness, I got to look at forest fires and wildfires, and I got to help determine how to help people evade these areas. And that was so satisfying. I think you see the same thing in a location like St. Louis. People who have been in the government see these new commercial capabilities. They stand up new businesses. They've entered politics. So a lot of the politicians that provided capacity in the city at a low cost to stand up buildings and areas devoted to geospatial technology, and then to build an entire theme around it. I said a lot of that just comes right from that historical underpinning. And then a drive to help move your city forward from a technical perspective. Denver's a little bit different because they've always been rich in technical capability in the aerospace industry, in the compute industry. They've had centers of excellence focused on those areas. So I think geospatial and geointelligence just was part of that infrastructure. So it didn't become like a marketing tool or a focal point. But I would say if people in the industry, they would say, of course, Denver is a geospatial hotbed, so to speak. Other cities, I think, I don't know that it will be GeoINT or geospatial, but I do think we play a role in smart cities and will be there. So as cities move forward, the progression and the use of open source intelligence, of IP cameras, anything that helps you provide imaging, that gives you public assistance and public protection, it's becoming more and more embraced. I don't know that they'll say geospatial or geointelligence, but for me, I saw something on TV last night in the DC area, an unfortunate instance, but they caught an image of a person on a camera, and now they're able to say, and they pinpointed it on a map, and the underpinning of the map was a satellite image. And they said, this is where this image was taken. If anyone knows anything, please let us know. Well, I have a big smile on my face because I've been able to see that from the beginning when there was no understanding commercially of what to do or how to utilize this. So whether they call it GeoINT or geospatial, I still have a lot of satisfaction, and I think everyone should that's been involved in the science, the technology, the business of it. We know that we were part of that movement that created a piece of technology that impacts the world continuously, every minute of every single day.
And that is an excellent transition to my last question for you, is what keeps you inspired about the industry? How do you feel about the industry? What's turned into today? And so what are your parting words of wisdom to people who you want to get involved with it? Young folks in college who are trying to figure out their career paths, perhaps rising seniors in high school who are trying to figure out what to study, going even further back. What would your parting words of inspiration be to them?
My favorite part of the industry. So when I got in it, I worked with phenomenal senior scientists, phenomenal. Dr. Shelby Tilford. And I couldn't even begin to name all the scientists who supported me, taught me, took time. So I think there's two things in the industry. This industry never loses intellectual capability. People work much longer in this industry than in most. And we have this phenomenal group of young business people, applied scientists, engineers, astrophysicists, individuals that are creating technology that all are underpinnings. And I would say that's the most exciting piece to me, because you're learning from masters and the masters are learning from the students, because the students have innovations that, because they're so digitally native. I always tell my interns, I'm like, okay, wait a second. My memory, I operate in file cabinets, and I open a drawer and I tick through that ABCD list, where they look at everything holistically and kind of in a circular manner, because they weren't bound by thinking in a cabinet where you have to open a drawer and pull things out. They pull from their mental intellect very differently than I do and than most people do. However, I can help them not go down a certain road, or I can give them a lot of research to say, this will help you. So to me, I'm so encouraged. I really have a passion. I'll be be in a workshop as well at GeoINT with the head professor of geospatial intelligence and certification at Chaminade University of Honolulu. We're going to be talking about workforce development side by side with a defense contractor who is providing an underpinning platform, automated platform, high performance compute at scale and at speed. And we're working with the university and other defense contractors to bring along an entire workforce, not just locally, but to stretch out and provide that same capacity to many, many universities and high schools in a way that we can begin to let these students use these capabilities, get exposure to it, and it doesn't matter where they are in the world, because the workforce of the future is remote. We can't find enough scientists and applied scientists and data analysts. We have to expand our thinking and change our thinking. And that combination of expertise and time at task, combined with the way high school students and young scientists and young technical folks think, it's blossoms into advanced capabilities that truly no one thought about. And when you look at the spectrum of the entrance into small sat world, my favorite, I was walking down the street the other night on my way to dinner, and a young man came running up to me and called out my name and gave me a great big hug. And it was one of the founders of Albedo Space. When they're going to get to space in 2 years, but my goal was to just help him understand the lay of the land. And everybody said, well, who is that? And I don't know how old Topher is and folks that work with him, but it's the perfect combination of inspiration and a different way of thinking with expertise to help them avoid some of those bumps along the way. So that to me is the most exciting thing about the industry. And I encourage everyone to look at it that way. So if you have a capability and you can help, because the individuals that are entering the industry want that assistance, and they want people to listen. And this is a very intricate and a very complex industry as well. I mean, many times it really is rocket science. So we have to keep coming together. But I see that more every day, and that's inspiring to me.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Shawana Johnson, for joining us on Project Geospatial. It's been a pleasure to have you on the show. And I can't wait to see you at the GeoINT Symposium next month.
Yes, come and vote. So
vote on what specifically?
This is a tradecraft competition. And my particular area will be focused on understanding 5G and how to merge geospatial capability with that and reduce the attack surface for the Department of Defense based on the entry in that space by China.
And we're voting on its.
There'll be there's 4 total presenters. All of them have a tradecraft demonstration. And so I will be on stage. I am there representing several vendors. The main vendor is Descartes Labs. L3 Harris will be there as well. AWS will be on stage as well. And Hawkeye 360. So we were the 4 finalists in a competition that was held a week ago. And we'll be on the main stage during this tradecraft competition. There'll be 2 other runners-up. They'll be in the government hub. That's the innovation hub. And that is white space and scale AI. So
very exciting.
They're all really, really worthy of a good look by everyone that's there.
Well, thank you very much, Shawana, and we will we'll definitely watch and encourage everybody to vote.
Yeah,
and check out what you have to offer.
All right.
All right. Well, thank you very much, everyone.